Hello, YouTube. My name is Daith, and today I'm going to go over the first season of Friendly Neighborhood Spider Man with you. So, all in all, after watching, it's been a few days since the first season ended, and I gotta say, I enjoyed it a lot. It's not my favorite Spider Man series, it's not my least favorite Spider Man series. I would say it's, pretty well right there. I would say high middle. It was really good to me, so it has a lot of things that it does on its own that's pretty interesting. Uh, let's kind of go from the beginning and start all over again. Cue the Spider Verse, which in itself, that is a good way to kind of explain this. So when they first, announced this series, they said this was going to tie into the MCU of Spider-Man, and not really. Yes and no. It's a fun, if anything, multiversal take on the MCU Spider Man. There's a lot of similarities, and like you actually see some events play out from the MCU, but without Peter's direct influence in them. So here's how it kind of the series opens up with it's still before Pete's actually been bitten by the spider, and we start the first episode with him about ready to go to Midtown High, like he would be in the MCU. And as he's getting there, a well, I don't want to spoil too much, but like something weird, some multiversal battle happens in front of the school, and from this battle drops the spider. You know, as like the two superpower battlers are going on, the spider just drops down from this portal that they came out of. And, that's where eventually Peter gets bitten by the spider in this first episode. But here's where that this is kind of like where we alter the timeline here. This battle now has wrecked the school. So Pete doesn't go to Midtown anymore. Thus, he's going to just like a normal public school in the middle of, Brooklyn or something like that. I can't remember if it was Brooklyn. I'm not well versed in New York boroughs and stuff. So, but anyways, he's going to a normal public school like he, probably would have been anyways. He's not going to the high end, brainiac school of Midtown anymore. The fun part is though they also introduce a character who is also going to go to Midtown at the same time, yet isn't normally part of the Spider-Man supporting cast, as her character really wasn't even around until probably the early 2000s, and that would be the character of Nico Minoru, who in this ends up becoming Peter's fast new friend in the high school. She's kind of a she's it so if you've seen The Runaways, you might know who I'm talking about. She is actually a part of that cast originally. That was her debut in the comics. And in this, they haven't quite gotten into the powered part of her character, but she's still kind of like the goth, anti-authoritarian, you know, yet fun-loving kind of gal. Though in this, she is already away from her parents, but in a foster home situation. So that's a little different there. So, anyways, going on, and we find out that we're not getting the usual supporting cast, even from like classic Spider Man here. You have Pete and you have uh, Aunt May, again, hot Aunt May supremacy with, kind of based off the MCU version. Not quite Marissa Tomei, but, looking fine for the animation style. And okay, and then later on we get introduced to Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn, who in this they've kind of race swapped to being black. Kind of makes more sense with the cornrows, I'll admit. But nothing bad about that. I don't mind it. It's an interesting visual change, if anything. They don't really play into it at all. It's just that's who they are, and whatever. So, anyways, so yes, Harry of course gets saved by Spider-Man early on in like episode 1, and this is when, if you can see the image, you can see the image right here. He's not quite, set out with his normal outfit and anything yet. He's very much, starting out in this point in the series. And the first season is basically his journey to becoming what we usually know as Spider-Man. So the first episodes kind of play along. We get introduced to the main supporting cast at the high school. So after Pete saves Harry in the middle of the town, he gets to the school, and we get introduced to, let's see, oh man, I can't remember her name. Basically, the love interest. She's a newer character from the comics again. Pearl, that's her name, Pearl. I don't know the last name, but basically, she's adapted for this as just kind of a normal girl for the moment that we know. If I want to say, I want to say Polynesian, you know, but she's also Peter's, main love interest in this. But she's already within the first episode, she's already dating someone else, and that would be Lonnie Lincoln. And if you know your comics, that's a name familiar to you. As in the course of this first season, we see his transition from being star football player at the high school to the leader of a gang under his normal comic nom de guerre of Tombstone. So, and a lot of this, it's going to be a lot of origin stories for a lot of the characters, obviously, because it's the first season. So, anyway, but the fun part is Lonnie is really a standout guy over the course of the first season. Even when it gets involved with the gang later on, he's more doing it, out of necessity. He's not really initially wanting to be part of it, but he does end up getting ingrained into the lifestyle a bit over the course of the season, but not to the point where he's anti Spider-Man at this point. Him and Spider-Man actually, cooperate a good amount of times over the course of the season, and it's because Peter and Lonnie kind of like hit it off at school right off the bat. You know, sure, Peter's a little jealous that he's Lonnie's dating his main squeeze and everything, but you know Lonnie, instead of being the typical jock that you would think, he's all willing to try and better himself. He's trying to you know he wanted Peter as the lab partner in the science class because he knows Peter's the one who's going to get him where he needs to go. And this is where thing gets a little interesting. At By the end of the first episode, Peter's already been called into a internship at Oscorp. Suspicious much? Hmm. So we go to Oscorp, and we get Peter is put into this part of a think tank with a bunch of other young characters. Some I'm familiar with, and a few that I've probably heard of but forgotten. The two female characters that's in the think tank, I don't really remember. I know one of them ends up being a vigilante character of some sort, and another girl's from Wakanda. The one I do know very well, though, Amadeus Cho, who I've never thought that any media adaptation has really got him well. They always tend to turn him into the cocky, brash, asshole, smart ass. Always the brain, yeah, and he's always got the brain to back it, but it's just like I don't like that version of him. It's like, yes, he's smart, yes, he's, but I was introduced to him as like the advocate for the Hulk. He was the one who, saw who Banner and the Hulk really were and fought for them, with, all of his heart. Anyways, moving on. So we also get introduced to his two mentors. I can't remember the head of the think tank, but it's the character is an adaptation of the Wizard from like the Fantastic Four comics, and he's just kind of the old disgruntled, scientist who's like always feels like he's got a chip on his shoulder because he's never been proven to be, the lead anywhere. And then the other senior scientist in the think tank is uh, I can't remember what they went with her. Oh wait, Carla Connors. So she's a female gender bent version of Kurt Connors, normally, which would be the lizard. And, this also includes her missing an arm, like, Kurt normally would. So, so we go through the first, I can't remember. I would say this is probably in the middle of the second episode where they're in the middle of the think tank. And of course, shenanigans go down. Pete has to go out and, save someone in the city. Changes in the middle of the stairway, and once he gets back, he gets called up to Norman's office. Who, of course, he'd already had an idea that who after seeing footage of how his son was saved, he had like a profile built up of who could be part of this, and part of his little teenage think tank was just trying to find out who Spider-Man was. So kudos to Norman for thinking that far ahead. So a good part of the season is actually Norman being this version of Pete's Iron Man from the MCU, his, benefactor. So like the next few episodes has them like basically testing out new costumes and gear to help him, save the city. And the fun part is they have some fun references to the Identity Crisis costumes, if you know those from the was that late 90s or early 2000s, one of you know that era. So, and it's fun because three of the costumes are basically callbacks to those personas that Peter used briefly in the comics. So, and of course, none of them work out. One we have a Edna mode situation, no capes. Another one is oh, well, one was just too scary for being friendly neighborhood, and then what was the third one? Oh, and then we had the little over tech version that didn't quite worked with Peter's powers too well. So finally, Norman finally gives him version of a high tech version of his spider suit, which, if you know comics, is kind of akin to his solid white and black Future Foundation suit from when he was in the Future Foundation Fantastic Four spinoff. So not having to do with anything with the Fantastic Four in this. It's, just, that it's basically based off of that version. Solid white, kind of techie spider, and he's got like it's got almost the same functionality as his suit in the MCU at this point, basically. So so a lot of the series is going to be him fighting these newer villains that are getting tech from an odd source who, eventually come to know as, it's going to be Otto Octavius. And this version of Otto, he's definitely got that whole like superior vibe to him, but instead of being like he's got a very bombastic personality this version. You know, when he finally has to, get into the fight himself at one point, he's just sitting here like kind of dancing around with his tech, using the mechanical arms and wacky ways and but I'm getting ahead of myself. So another part of the series is basically Pete having to deal with, of course, the usual hiding his Spider-Man persona from his friends and how that affects things. More interestingly enough, by the end of the season, Harry obviously gets to know because he ends up, being in Norman's office once, he accidentally walks in, taking his mask off, big surprise there. A bit different from like any of the comics, but and Harry almost becomes his this version's Ned, the guy in the chair. So and then later on, you know, the big thing was him and Nico were really close friends over the course of, the start of high school. So once Spider-Man starts taking over his life, Nico starts seeing this as, taking, Peter's, being distant and not wanting to be her friend anymore, which, she doesn't feel like she's got a lot of friends at this point. And so once Harry gets involved with Peter in a more friendly sense, she sees that as a threat. They butt heads, and there's an episode where the two of them end up bonding it finally. But over the course, Harry accidentally blabs that Pete is Spider-Man, which, makes feels like a betrayal to Nico since Pete never told her. And I'm spoiling things again. I need to stop doing this. I want to talk about these things, and that's the problem. I don't get to talk about them, and this is my chance to. So, yeah, spoiler reviews, that's going to be my thing. I'm sorry, people. So, anyways, I'm trying not to spoil everything. Like, I don't want to tell you what all villains are going to be in there. Just kind of let you know that they're all kind of like Octavius tech enhanced villains. Yeah. Some of them, been pretty obvious in the previews where they're going to come in and everything. So, one of the big bads over the course of the season, actually, though, that deals more with Lonnie's storyline is Matt Gargan, who, again, more famously known as the Scorpion. And they kind of merged the Matt Gargan character from the MCU, where he's kind of like a gang leader. We didn't really see him a whole lot in the MCU, as like we only kind of really saw him near the end of like the Homecoming movie where he was in jail talking to Toombs. And the only reason you really would know it's Scorpion is because he's got the Scorpion tattoo on his neck or something like that. And they kind of keep that look for this version in the cartoon. So, but of course, in this, he ends up getting, the mechanical tail from Octavius eventually. And like near the end of the season, that's the big fight is him versus Spider-Man and Tombstone. So as far as Lonnie becoming Tombstone, that's very much still late. He gets the moniker a little like mid-season from just being in the gang, and by the end of the season, he's been exposed to something that will give him his more common powers in the comics. Not quite his skin tone yet, though. They kind of hint at that near the end, but they aren't really, they're just keeping him, just normal black kid for now. So, anyways, so I'm gonna hold off from spoiling a little too much more. The end of the season ends off basically Norman kind of went overboard trying to find Octavia since it was, some of Octavius's research dealt with, what was going on at Oscorp. And the fun part of this is like some of the stuff at Oscorp, it kind of creates a bootstrap paradox. So I want to say that's the right, a time travel, you know, snafu that, if this doesn't happen, this doesn't happen. And, it it's kind of funny in the way that it, this version kind of just creates themselves in a way. It's like, where does it all start if it never should have started to begin with? But it starts in the first place. So, anyways, yeah. And there's definitely some plot threads hanging. Obviously, Lonnie's still in the gang, he pretty much gets the leader status by that point. Pete now has, like, he's trying to get away from Norman himself, though you definitely see some hints at Norman having, goblin-esque tendencies, you could say. But Harry, Harry and Nico convince Peter to basically create his own teenage think tank with, trying to invite some of the other members and maybe just some of his other friends that, might be able to help. In second season, I guess we're having, Harry running his new uh well, we'll just I'm not gonna spoil it, just the new think tank of his friends. So, but the most interesting part comes when we see Aunt May visit someone. And I'm not going to say who, but it is definitely an interesting twist that really doesn't see a lot of. It's not something that we usually see play in the Spider-Man mythos. So I'm kind of curious where that's going. And just before I start recording this, they did spoil something for season two. I'll keep that off, but let's hope that we don't have multiple multiple spiders running around is all I'll say. Though there is definitely ways that it could be happening within, what they showed off in season one here. So overall, I think it's a fun show. It's really good. I haven't really gone off on the art style real quick. Um, I like this. It's like the art is very clean, but the fun thing that gets me is like the coloring reminds me a lot of like early comic books. It's kind of got that like yellowish tint to it, or like, the colors are just kind of just like they're bright but not overly, garish. You look at Peter's suit here in the picture here with his like prototype suit, and it's like you can just see how it's kind of like it's not it's eye grabbing colors yet subdued. And even when you got some of the other more colorful villains or even outfits that Pete wears, it's still kind of got that more subdued tone or look to it, and I like it. It's definitely an interesting choice. A lot of you can see a lot in the credits. They go through like concept art a bit, and you see where they kind of like did things to look both modern yet the old like Kirby-esque or Ditko-esque I should say art style. So, anyways, I've been going on for 25 minutes now. I don't want to be making another gigantic video here. Thank you for watching. I hope you guys check this out. It's a great series so far. I would say if you have the time, go binge through it. It's all season one's up now. Have fun and have a good night, guys.